Hello and welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Let's see, today we're going to talk a little bit about something new. This is going to be entitled QNAP Perfect Storm. So, a perfect storm is a collection of events that result in a cumulative effect. In the last 4 weeks, we experienced a family emergency and we had an inexplicable outage on a portion of the home automation, and also all 34 of my self-hosted containers went offline. So I've been kind of busy bringing everything back, and by the way, all 3 of those were completely unrelated. So my production hosting environment is a QNAP TS1277, which is a Ryzen 7 1700 Pro with 64 gigabytes of memory and a RAID 6 array, providing net storage of around 50 terabytes. So I opened a ticket to QNAP on January 18th, and I logged a user support call requesting help to remove a corrupted LXD container from Container Station. And those of you that have been watching the channel know that I use LXD containers to host a lot of my self-hosted software. So a few days later, on the 22nd, I authorized remote help desk access to the system for help to remove the bad container. They asked for remote access, so I provided it to them. On the morning of January 28th, customer support signed on remotely and fixed the issue, keeping the container from being deleted. And about 90 minutes afterwards, all of my Docker and also LXD containers began to fail one by one. So by mid-afternoon, looking around the system, I discovered that my container root file systems were owned by a 911 user account or by QNAP support. Well, I later learned that 911 user is what happens in a QTS operating system when you delete a user and you don't assign file ownership back to another user. I found that kind of ironic though, because I hadn't deleted any users from the system, and yet I had a lot of files that were owned either by 911 or QNAP support. For those of you that aren't aware, it's normal for most of your files on the system to be owned by the admin account and then by whatever other accounts that you grant permissions for. So in addition, all file permissions within my containers had been modified as though there had been some kind of a global chmod command issued to change all the file ownerships. So consoles of all LXD and Docker containers were starting to report access denied errors, and it was also discovered that the sudo bit on userbin sudo and other files that had a sudo bit applied to them had been cleared, resulting in failure of services to restart on reboot because systemctl received access denied errors. As I would go through the consoles of the various containers, I was starting to see access denied errors. And in fact, the access denied errors weren't even telling me what the error access was being denied at, because it was at such a high level that these errors were being triggered. So QNAP initial call issue was really I was unable to delete this corrupted container. So I had created a self-hosted instance of the Chasm software, and it wasn't working properly, and so I was going to go create another instance, and I was getting ready to delete that instance, and I got a failed to destroy application error deleting storage volume. And if you look down here further, it says basically that the operation is not permitted because it couldn't get rid of this 1 gigabyte swap file. Well, interestingly enough, I had noticed that the application created a swap file, but when I stopped it and tried to delete it, it wouldn't let me delete. And furthermore, if I tried to start the container back up, I couldn't start the container, so I couldn't get inside that operating system or container instance to unmount this offending swap file. And that's why I logged the call to QNAP user support. So then we look at my Monitor. Monitor is a piece of free and open source software that I self-host on my system that monitors all of my container systems. And this is kind of what it looked like. So you can see all the red there, everything that's basically offline. And you can see some things are yellow that are unresponsive. That's pretty much the same thing. And there's only a few things that are green, and the things that are green are the things that are not being hosted by that particular QNAP. So then one really key thing, as you all know, is that when you provide multiple services that you're hosting, you're going to be using Reverse Proxy Manager, and I use Nginx Reverse Proxy Manager. And that's a Docker container, as you're probably aware. So looking at it, you can see from the console of Container Station that it's reporting permission denied on this one particular file, and actually when it came down to it, on a whole lot more files, and it ended up corrupting the database of Nginx Proxy Manager, even though that was a mounted volume outside the system. So I'm not sure what caused that, but I'm pretty sure that it was all related. And then we had several system CTL failures. You know that system CTL is the Linux command that's used to start, stop, enable, and disable services or daemons running on the system. And so here's an example in Container Station where Pi-hole looks like it's starting up just fine, but at the end it says failed to start light T TPD daemon, and it just says look at it for details. When you look at it, it says that it was access denied again. So where are LXD containers stored on the system? Well, if you've ever had an Ubuntu system and you're going to start up LXD daemon from scratch, one of the questions that the LXD init command asks you is where do you want to store your files? And you end up building a storage pool, and that storage pool can be located on some disk somewhere. Well, there's only one storage pool on a QNAP, and that one storage pool is the default storage pool, and it is stored in this location, /var/lib/lexd storage-pools/default/containers. So here you can see I did an LSAL on that structure, and you can see a whole series of my containers. This is after I fixed everything. Everything's up and running again now, but that's what this location looks like. So how did I fix this problem? Well, that previous screen that you were looking at with all those locations, before I fixed it, it was all owned by a combination of the 911 user and the QNAP support user. So never, can't use enough nevers. Never change container files unless you're running from within the container instance. In other words, don't navigate to that directory I just showed you and do a change permissions. So basically, don't touch /var/lib/lexd/storage-pools default containers, because if you do, something horrible will happen to you that happened to me. Obviously, QNAP didn't heed that particular issue. So each subfolder represents the container contents, but that's not all there is to a container. So you can't navigate down inside of one of your containers and look at the files and change files, because there are other external XML files that dictate how a container is structured and how it runs. And for that reason, you should always be accessing a container by SSHing into it, connecting to its console from Container Station, or going to the command line and in the QNAP and doing a lexc exec container name, and then enter the Bash shell and then do it from there. So QNAP accidentally altered the ownership and file protection of that entire structure we just looked at, which damaged all containers in Container Station. This damage is just like if you were on any standalone Linux machine and you did a chown, which is change ownership, or a chmod, which is change protections from the root and went all the way downwards. So you can imagine that would break a system pretty thoroughly. So the results were completely catastrophic, as you can imagine. So we have to dig deeper for some solutions. How exactly are we going to fix this? Well, we have to consider that all breakages of any system should be considered learning experiences. And there's pretty much two ways to react to that type of breakage. One way is to lay blame. Another way is to go hustle and find a solution. So the first thing QNAP asked is if I had backups of all my containers. Of course a vendor would ask that question. So sadly, I had converted all of my LXC containers to LXD because of the message that all of us QNAP users received back in June of last year, which said, hey, migrate all your LXC containers to LXD. And I used the LXC migration tool that I had presented in another one of my videos. And if you haven't seen that, go back and take a look at that because I think it'll be very helpful. So QNAP Container Station has no current export or backup function for LXD, despite directing all the users to move over to LXD. So they have an export command and an import command for LXCs and for Dockers, but not for LXDs. So I had to use the LXC command line to export some of my converted containers, and I was kind of in the process of doing that when this perfect storm struck. I hadn't really completed all of it. So what was my solution? Well, I chowned the entire container structure from QNAP support and 911 ownership over to admin. I basically went into that place that I told you to never, ever, 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 ever change, and I changed it. Well, I had to because I had to change it back because obviously something that QNAP support did ended up changing that structure, and I wasn't able to identify what it was, but it happened at exactly the same time that they were in the system. So I compared the file tree of a healthy Linux system, and I basically built a script. And this is what the script looks like. I'll put this script in the show notes if it might help somebody else. But basically, all I did was I went ahead and put the sudo sticky bit back on, and I went ahead and changed the file ownership, or not file ownership, but the directory protections of the directories that I thought that I should fix. And so that took care of a good number of the problems. I mean, it didn't solve everything, but it did take care of a good number of the problems. So what are the fine details? Well, I restarted the containers after I ran the script on everything, and in most cases, the access denied errors pretty much went away. So then I had to enter each container from the console command line, and I had to change the ownership of the home folders. So depending upon my container, I might have had one or more user accounts. A lot of times I created a Scott account, and of course the default account inside of any LXD container for Ubuntu was Ubuntu. So I had to look at the file ownership of these things, and in every case, they ended up being owned by QNAP support. So that was kind of an issue. And that was what probably started the problem to begin with. So even though I'd fixed the operating system, the user's home folders, which software may very well be running out of, it wasn't fixed. So did all of that work? Well, I restored the backups that I had, and I changed the file ownership and permissions as we reviewed here. And for the most part, that wasn't so bad. But in some cases, I had to rebuild my containers from scratch. So it took me almost 72 hours to fix all these problems and bring all of my services back online properly. So free and open source software is great, but remember, keep good notes and backups whenever possible. And so I have some videos out here where I talk about how to use the LXC import-export command to import and export your LXD containers. And I also talk about how to do container snapshots. And in addition to that, I have another video where we talk about Joplin notes and how good it is to track your notes in a Joplin sync server to sync your notes so that they're safely protected. So not everything worked, but it does now. So what did QNAP say as a result of all of this? Well, QNAP was willing to fix my problems, but there was not a lot they could do because they weren't really skilled in most of my applications. I mean, when they were on the phone, they might have known how to go past or look at my web server, but they might not have known how to look at certain other applications. And I realized pretty quickly that it was a shot in the dark pretty much for them to try to put these things arbitrarily back to what they should have been. And then QNAP's initial efforts were kind of similar to mine. They fixed my web server by manually setting files and folders, and we were in a TeamViewer session, and I kind of watched what they did, and I realized that I could probably do this myself, and I was more knowledgeable of my own applications. So QNAP took responsibility, but in the end, better backups would have really been more useful, and that's a no-brainer. I mean, we all should be doing great backups, right? So my Joplin notes were completely invaluable in rebuilding containers and setting the proper defaults. I had great notes that told me how to rebuild all these things from scratch. I will put one caveat in there though. My Rocket Chat server was a real pain to rebuild because, as it turns out, when you install a piece of open source software, over time what ends up happening is that the installation procedure that you used say 6 months down the road, as file versions and components and dependencies change and version numbers, the notes that you made may not really exactly work. And that was the case with my Rocket Chat server. So I had to spend a lot of time trying to rebuild it. And I ended up discovering that a Rocket Chat server installed from scratch from the actual notes that they give you on the Rocket Chat site right now today don't work. So I've got a workaround for that. I've been talking to Brian on Awesome Open Source, and I gave him the notes that I did to do that, and he may be making a new Rocket Chat video to kind of describe what steps you have to take to end up with a working Rocket Chat server. So then my report back to QNAP was that I thought that customer dialogue and service delivery management are key to protecting the QNAP brand, and QNAP lacks transparency. I mean, they've had some brand damage lately. I found several more instances of folder structures owned by QNAP support, which I chowned back to admin, and I also had to adjust privileges on all of these structures. And then I thought it prudent not to have QNAP and myself doing this at the same time, so I disabled remote help desk on this call and told them, never mind, I'll do it myself. So after they worked for a couple of days, I realized that we weren't making the progress that we needed to, and really they weren't knowledgeable of all of the apps, as I'd mentioned earlier. So I now have current backups of all the changes I made, but QNAP has some critical actions. So take note of these. Number one, I asked them to add an import-export functionality to Container Station for us end users. Number two, provide LXD snapshot support within Container Station, within the Container Station GUI. Sure, you can use it from the command line, as I've had told you in my other presentations, but it should be in Container Station as well. And then provide LXD profile support in Container Station in order to support VLANs, since Container Station does not work with VLANs created in Network and Virtual Switch, even though their virtualization station does. So we don't have product parity between Container Station and Virtualization Station. And then I said that LXD containers right now have to run privileged on Container Station or they fail, and that's non-standard for LXD. Standard LXD, you don't have to run those containers privileged. I noticed in the latest version of Container Station, if you try to create one that's unprivileged, it will throw up a message saying that would you like to change it to privileged or else it won't run. And I thought that was kind of cute. Why not fix the problem instead of putting up a message? But nonetheless, that's what's there right now. And then finally, customers need to have a detailed report out on exactly which commands and procedures QNAP uses to solve customer tickets for proper transparency. I mean, we don't learn anything as end customers if you put in a user support call, they wave a magic wand and everything's working. We need to We need to share the tribal knowledge, and that's what this is all about in open source. And I'm trying to get those guys in the mode where, they kind of look at the user command line SSHing as an unsupported taboo thing for end users. Yet we know that we need to be able to do that, and all Linux users need to understand that. So what exactly did QNAP say as a result of my report out? Well, Jimmy T, and I'm not going to mention his last name, but he's the Container Station product manager in the R&D department based in Taiwan, has informed me that they will support all 5 of the features that I just mentioned in the report out. So a future version of Container Station will do that. And right now I have an open dialogue with QNAP, and that's a good thing. That's kind of a first, but they are interested in improving things. They recognize the need for improvement. And the product manager is meeting with the QNAP CEO this week in order to finalize and publish a product roadmap, which I asked that they share openly with customers. In the past, when I've been talking to customer support, they've told me that the product roadmaps are proprietary, and I told them, well, that doesn't give end users the opportunity to be able to plan for future enhancements. And if you do some consulting like I do and you deploy these things for end users or customers, then you're going to want to have a product roadmap to understand where things are going. So I also indicated that communications between customers, customer support, and the Taiwan Product Engineering Development Group has to be more transparent. And he totally agreed and said that this comment would also be passed along to the CEO. So I asked that a QNAP service delivery manager be hired stateside to create a customer liaison and also to publish product roadmaps. I'm not entirely sure that this will happen, but I think they've taken it under advisement, and I'm going to continue to press that idea because I think we really need somebody out there, if not at least a user advocate, right? So then I asked for QNAP representation in the QNAP forums to address end user problems and questions in real time. For any of you that are Unify customers, you notice that you can go out to the Unify forums, ask questions, and guys like UI Glenn will respond with specific answers, and he's a Unify employee. So I asked, hey, can we have a QNAP employee that's live in the QNAP forums to do the same sort of thing? And they really liked that. They thought that was a neat idea. I'm surprised they hadn't thought of it. But I said, now you need a dedicated resource as part of your customer support organization that handles that real time. So is QNAP that bad as a company? Well, no, but clearly they need to improve. So too many OEMs today offer a substandard customer service model where solutions don't go beyond the documentation, and the customer support people are basically script readers. Like I like to say, script reading is king. And if I've called user support, I've already read the manual. I already know the simple answers. I'm looking for answers to more complex problems. And I know all the users might not be like that, but we need the answers for the more technical issues. So poor customer support impacts the brand name of any company. And too many OEMs release products that seem to be alpha or beta releases and not production. And I have to tell you that QNAP is not the only company that has this problem. You can almost pick any company out there, and I'm not talking about open source. I'm talking about OEMs. You buy a hardware software product out there now, and so often it seems in the last 10 years that we're not buying finished products. We're instead buying products that appear to be in work, and that needs to stop, and we need to get production releases with more quality in them. So QNAP is an application server and not just a NAS. I mean, I talk to so many people online that have a QNAP and they basically use it for file storage. Realize this thing's an application server. As a matter of fact, I've deployed some QNAPs to end customers, and I refer to it as a data center in a box, and it's a server. It lets you do Docker containers. It lets you do virtual machines. It lets you do LXD containers. And there's a lot of power there. If you're just using your QNAP for nothing but file storage, you're really selling yourself short. So all QNAP type Q applications like Music Station, Photo Station, Note Station, QVPN, and other things like that are OEM added value. I mean, they basically have the actual device, and then they provide all these QNAP provided applications. They're great. They work fine. Some of them have bugs like any other software, but they're not necessarily the best in class. I encourage you all to go out and look at free and open source software like Brian presents on his channel, Awesome Open Source, to see what kinds of capabilities you can really implement out there. And containers are the way to do this. So do your research and use QNAP as an application server for free and open source self-hosted solutions. So in summary, QNAP realizes they're losing customer loyalty through ransomware attacks and also incompletely vetted software releases that have bugs. There are no perfect companies, but many of them out there sure need to improve, and QNAP has room for improvement. And I felt good because in this dialogue, they admitted and agreed that they saw that. So QNAP provides added value in many areas. With great power comes great responsibility, one of my favorite statements. QNAP functions are powerful and give you many opportunities to implement insecure or unstable application solutions if not knowledgeable. So like any tool, you have to use it properly, and good planning and good education go a long way to avoiding mistakes. Anyway, thanks for coming by and visiting today, and I hope you'll subscribe and like to the channel, and I promise it won't be that long until we come up with another one for next time.